In the previous video, we concluded the seven bowls of wrath, and what we've been seeing is that the book of Revelation moves through cycles. It is not written in chronological order. The seven seals show us one view of history leading up to the second coming of Jesus Christ. The seven trumpets show another. The seven visions of holy war show another. And then the seven bowls of wrath show yet another. Well, now we've recapitulated a final time. We've gone back to look at history from a different perspective, from the perspective of the conflict of the two women. So let's begin. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, and I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is seated by many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk." And he carried me away in the spirit into a desert, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality, and on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of whores and of the earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. Now, prostitute language pervades the Old Testament and is usually aimed at apostate Israel. And so a lot of the language that we're going to encounter here in relationship to Mystery Babylon has been drawn from the Old Testament in Israel, not, of course, in its faithful moments, but in the moments when it had turned its back on Yahweh. And I just want to give you a couple of examples here. This is a major theme in Hosea. Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband, that she put away her whoring from her face and her adultery from between her breasts. So obviously, very strong language there, where Yahweh is depicted as the husband and Israel is his wife, and she is cheating on him, despite the fact that he has been faithful, despite the fact that he has been a loving provider. You get another example of this in Ezekiel 16, where Yahweh found Israel as a young child in her blood, thrown out and abandoned. He took care of her, he raised her, and when she was of age, he married her. But you trusted in your beauty and played the whore because of your renown, and lavished your whorings on any passer-by. Your beauty became his. You took some of your garments and made for yourself colorful shrines, and on them played the whore. The like has never been, nor shall be. So the notion is that every time she cheats on him, it's at one of these shrines, because that's the metaphor. Whenever Israel would go and whore after other gods, it was in this process of idolatrous worship. So a lot of this language that we are going to see in relationship to the great prostitute naturally will draw on Old Testament imagery of apostate Israel. But it's not just Israel. Mystery Babylon in this passage is going to, for Revelation 17 and 18, she dominates the sea. That's how she has control of the world. She dominates the sea lanes, the channels for sea trade, etc. And so the Old Testament city of Tyre, which was the capital of Lebanon to the north of Israel, this will also be a controlling image for Mystery Babylon in Revelation. I'll give you an example here as well. It will come about at the end of 70 years that the Lord will visit Tyre. Then she will go back to her harlot's wages and will play the harlot with all the kingdoms of the face of the earth. Now, I want you to notice that this harlotry is defined in terms of her economics. Her gain and her harlot's wages will be set apart to the Lord. It will not be stored up or hoarded, but her gain will become sufficient food and choice attire for those who dwell in the presence of the Lord. So she spreads her filth through a process of economic trade and influence. And this is how she diffuses her evil to the world. Now, when the Hebrew version of this passage in Isaiah was translated into Greek, the word fornicate was simply translated as to become a market. This is the way Jews understood this. Tyre sins had a strong economic component. Here's some archaeological remains of Tyre. And of course, the remains of the harbor. Again, uh, Tyre frequented the sea, and so the remains of the harbor are quite impressive. What's been preserved. Now, many critics of the Bible suggest that the Bible is not very good at predicting history. Uh, that the Bible, oftentimes, most of its prophecies consist of predicting the destruction of certain nations, especially great empires and powerful countries or war-making countries. And the way the criticism goes is to say, well, hey, the Bible is going to have a 100% success rate, not because its prophets are really speaking by God, but because anybody can point to any great nation and say, hey, in due course, you're going to fall. That always happens. Great empires always go the way of history. Strong nations always fall eventually. And so, is it all that impressive when the Bible gets it right? Well, Christians have responded by pointing out certain passages, uh, not where the Bible makes a vague prophecy and it's fulfilled, but where the Bible is very specific and against all odds, it gets fulfilled as well. I'll give you an example here from the book of Ezekiel against Tyre. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Tyre, and will bring up many nations against you as the sea brings up its waves. They shall destroy the walls of Tyre and break down her towers. Now, here's the part we are concerned with. And I will scrape her soil from her and make her a bare rock. What you can see here in these pictures is the siege of Alexander the Great. Ezekiel writes a couple of centuries before Alexander the Great. And when Alexander comes through here in the 4th century BC, when he arrives at Tyre, the citizens of Tyre know that he does not have boats, that all he has are horses and people on foot. And so they say, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take all our wealth and our greatest possessions, and we're going to go out to the island on the sea. And that's where we will hold up until he passes by. He won't be able to come out here on the sea to get us because he has no boats. But they underestimated the determination of Alexander the Great. He began tearing down their town and building a land bridge out to this island so that he could besiege it. You can see this taking place, especially in the top picture here. And when he ran out of houses, etc., to build this land bridge, he just scraped up the soil from where the town had been and left it as a bare rock in order to build his land bridge. He eventually made it to the island and sacked the island. Now, this is a very specific prophecy that was fulfilled by Alexander the Great, and it just goes to show the prophetic acumen of the Bible. The Bible does not just traffic in vague sort of predictions that get fulfilled inevitably. Many of these are very precise and very impressive. And he carried me away in the spirit into a desert, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names. It had 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, Williamson reminds us that the beast represents political power opposed to Christ and his church, while the whore represents the empire as a socio-economic and cultural whole that is corrupt and displeasing to God. This is a good point to remember because the woman and the beast are not exactly identical. They are 2 different extensions of the same reality. The beast is sort of the military and the police headquarters uh, and institutions that are used to persecute the church. While the woman, she's not the violent arm itself, rather, she is the socio-economic center that benefits from the protection of the beast. And she is cultural, right? She exports her, her false religion and her false values to the rest of the world. And so she rides this beast. She is the socio-economic, the cultural, the religious center of the empire, and the beast is the military arm of the empire. She's dressed in scarlet. Scarlet most likely points to the incredible luxury of the empire. In chapter 18, in verses 12 and 16, scarlet is mentioned twice among the economic luxuries of Mystery Babylon. Now, notice also that scarlet is very close to the color red. It's just another shade of red. And this is likely not a coincidence either, because red in Revelation is the color of war and bloodshed. Think back in Revelation chapter 6, in verses 3 through 4, you had the red horseman. He had a great sword. He took peace from the earth, and his horse was red. Also, the dragon and the beast persecuting powers, and they're both red. Well, she is in scarlet, and this goes to show us that this socio-economic center that is Mystery Babylon, she only maintains her high standard of living, her luxuriant lifestyle, on the basis of the violence that the beast perpetrates for her throughout the rest of the world, through exploiting and colonizing the rest of the world and taking their resources. This socioeconomic center, this city, is able to prop up its lifestyle by taking from others what should rightfully be theirs. It says she is by many waters. Now this goes back to Isaiah 21, which undoubtedly lies behind this text because it uniquely combines references to the desert and the sea when it says the oracle concerning the desert of the sea. Now this passage here is talking about old historical Babylon in Isaiah 21. And, old Babylon was in the desert, but it was also right off of the Euphrates River, which is the reference here when it says the desert and the sea, right? Or the desert of the sea. Now this woman here also, she's in the desert and she is by many waters. Now what Revelation has done, it has taken over the desert and the sea and given it its own symbolic connotations. In Revelation, the desert represents a place of trial and tribulation and testing. Remember the woman in Revelation 12 taking her Exodus journey through the desert. So it has that connotation. So this woman is in the desert because she is the tester. She's the one out there as you are on your spiritual journey toward the promised land. She's the one who's there to trip you up. And also the sea. Right? The sea in Revelation produced the beasts that came out of the sea. The sea is a storehouse for evil spirits. It has demonic connotations. So that she is in the desert and that she is by the waters of the sea shows that she is both a tempter and she also has demonic associations. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. Revelation intends for us to compare two women, these two women who are engaged in this conflict. And what this is a culmination of a struggle that's taken place throughout Scripture. Think of Sarah and Hagar. Think of Rachel and Rebekah. Think of the adulterous woman in Proverbs and the virtuous woman in Proverbs. Think of the conversation in Isaiah 54 or in Galatians chapter 4, where Paul talks about two mothers, one who is a slave with her children, which is Jerusalem below, and the other one which is free, and so are her children, which is Jerusalem above, the mother of us all. We've had this conflict between two women, which has really been a controlling paradigm throughout the Bible. And now we are at this final section of Revelation, and it comes to an end. One of these women meet her demise, while the other one goes on into eternity. And so we have seen the woman on the beast, and we have seen the woman in Revelation chapter 12 who represented Israel, the people of God. And so we're going to compare these two women so far, and you'll see in these points of comparison that John certainly intends for us to put these side by side. The prostitute has an earthly existence, as with the pregnant woman, descends from heaven to earth. She does this twice. We're always reminded of her heavenly identity. In Revelation 12, she is standing in the sun with the moon under her feet and the stars on her head. And then she comes down to the earth for her time of trial, her exodus journey in the wilderness. We'll see this again in Revelation 21. She will descend out of heaven onto the earth. And so she is a woman with heavenly identity, unlike the prostitute who is completely earthly in her existence. This woman on the right, she is the mother of the Messiah and of all Christians, as where the prostitute is the mother of other prostitutes. That is, there are other cities and hubs who are under her control, and she has reproduced evil in others. The heavenly woman sojourned in the desert for that 3.5 year period that we discussed back in Revelation 12, and as well as chapters 11 and 10 and 13. As where the prostitute just lives in the desert, right? If you are being tested, you're only passing through the desert. But if you are a tester, if you are a tempter, well, then you live there. The prostitute dwells by or on many waters. Either one of those translations works in the Greek. And of course, as we just stated a moment ago, the waters have demonic associations and represent demonic teachings. Now, the earth protects the heavenly woman from the serpent's waters, back in chapter 12, right, which represents the earth executing plagues against those who would try to corrupt the church with their false teachings. The prostitute is dressed in the gifts of her lovers. She's not depicted as, a low-end street-walking prostitute. She's a courtesan. She's more like a high-end call girl. All her clients are people of power and people with lots of money. And this is why she ends up getting such incredible gifts for her services, unlike the heavenly woman. She's dressed in the beauty of creation. She stands in the sun. She has the moon at her feet, the stars on her head. She has a natural beauty, as it were. They both have animal mobility. They both get around in this book on the basis of an animal. The prostitute goes upon the back of a scarlet beast, while the heavenly woman flies with the wings of an eagle. Now, this is interesting because the scarlet beast that carries the prostitute around comes up from the underworld, showing that the prostitute has these subterranean connections to the abyss, as where the heavenly woman flies with the wings of an eagle to show that she has heavenly associations. The prostitute drinks the blood and abominations, as where in Revelation 12 we saw that the heavenly woman was nourished by God in the desert like Elijah. One is a persecutor, one is persecuted, and the prostitute is described with Jezebel language, while the heavenly woman is described with Elijah language. Now this makes sense because in the Old Testament it was Jezebel who persecuted Elijah. And so we're seeing this Old Testament story played out here again, just writ large. And on her head was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. Babylon the Great is a phrase which occurs 6 times in the Apocalypse. Now, I don't think this should be a surprise to anyone who's been following this Bible study. 6 is the number of incompletion. 7 is a number of holiness, a number of incompletion. 6, therefore, is a number of incompletion. 6 is the number of man, the day on which man was made. Also, 6 is a triangular number. We've seen that triangular numbers are evil, square numbers are righteous, and rectangular numbers are both. And so, to find that Babylon the Great is a triangular number is of no surprise to us. Again, this all goes back to Daniel chapter 4, where Nebuchadnezzar is bragging about his kingdom. And he says, "Is not this Babylon the Great, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence for the glory of my majesty?" He's really flattering himself here. And then a voice comes from heaven and says, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you." And at this point, Nebuchadnezzar loses his humanity. He's reduced from being a man to being a beast and to eating, the grass of the field, etc. And this is the background language for the Antichrist figure in Revelation, who's consistently referred to as the beast because he's no longer a man. He has forfeited his humanity when he went to persecute the people of God. And so this beast background text in Daniel chapter 4 also supplies Revelation with this phrase, Babylon the Great. A name on her forehead. Now, Roman courtesans may have placed their names on the headbands that they wore. There is some evidence for this. And so, again, this could be drawing from the imagery, the milieu of real courtesans, real high-order prostitutes in the ancient world. Osborne reminds us that in the New Testament, the phrase son of refers to one's primary characteristics, such as son of righteousness. Thus, to be called the mother of other prostitutes means not only that whoredom characterizes her, but that she has reproduced it in others. Smalley says Babylon is described as mother because she is the archetype for empires that will rise throughout history. And certainly this is the right way to understand Babylon the Great. Babylon the Great is not one city that shows up in one corner of history. This war between the two women goes throughout Scripture and therefore throughout history. And so we find that Babylon the Great will show up by many names. First, she is Rome, who's persecuting the church. At a different time, she's Istanbul. At a different time, she's Beijing. At a different time, she's Mecca or Medina, or one of the great Islamic centers of the world. And we find that Babylon the Great, she always exists in one form or another. And the various forms of Babylon the Great in history are all signposts pointing ahead to the final version of Babylon the Great, which exists right before the second coming. So you don't want to make the mistake that some people make of thinking that Mystery Babylon is just a city in the first century, or that Mystery Babylon doesn't exist right now, that she's just a city that exists a few years before the second coming of Christ. Not so. This is a trans-historical struggle. This is a struggle that takes place all the way throughout history. You look for the city that persecutes the people of God while she tries to glorify herself and to live in wealth and splendor. That is Babylon the Great in any age. The phrase drunk with blood occurs in ancient writers such as Josephus and Suetonius, and it pictures the great joy with which armies slaughtered their enemies and even entire families. So, very violent picture here. Now, Christians would certainly understand this in relationship to their own experiences in the first century because of the way that the empire had treated them. The most famous example of this, of course, being the way Nero treated Christians after he blamed them for the fire of Rome in 64 AD. Tacitus described the carnage under Nero, saying that Christians were covered with the skins of beasts, torn by dogs, nailed to crosses, doomed to the flames, and burned to serve as a nightly illumination, as night lights in his gardens. And so we see then that this just would make a lot of sense to the original audience. They know how bloodthirsty the empire can be against the church. But the angel said to me, "Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was, and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was, and is not, and is about to come." This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, The other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an eighth, but it belongs to the seven, and it goes to destruction. Now that may seem very confusing, but we're going to look at this pretty closely, and we're going to untangle it and make sense of it. Celebrating Rome as the home of seven hills first appears in the mid-1st century BC. So in the modern world, as in the ancient world, Rome is celebrated as the city of seven hills. Very easy to make this connection for the ancient audience. It's been in place over a century before Revelation is written. The seven hills of Rome were celebrated in literature and coinage. A yearly festival commemorated Rome's expansion to enclose the seven hills within the city limits. On this basis, both Christian hearers and outsiders would immediately connect Babylon with Rome. This is according to the New Testament scholar David de Silva. So it's not just in popular usage, it's in literature, it's on coinage, and there is a yearly festival to commemorate this event. And here you can get a sense of the seven hills of Rome and the wall that enclosed them. Now, I've seen this exact map show up on the internet, and people think by doing tricky things they can get Vatican Hill in here. You can see Vatican Hill is on the other side of the Tiber River. I've seen one where because the guy had an axe to grind with the Catholic Church, and this teaching on Mystery Babylon is oftentimes used against the Catholic Church. He put all his writing, all his notes, right under Vatican Hill, and he thought by doing that maybe he could especially associate Vatican Hill with the seven hills of Rome. I don't know what was going on. I'm not Catholic, but I will tell you that if you have an axe to grind with the Catholic Church, you cannot fudge the evidence to make this work. Vatican Hill is not one of the seven hills of Rome. It is outside the walls of this, original designation. It's on the other side of the Tiber River. It is just not one of the seven hills of Rome. And so to include Vatican Hill in this would make no sense to the ancient audience at all. This map here may be, in fact, even though it's silly, it may be more educational than the other one. You can see, Quirinal Hill. This is, where it says snobs only because this is where the senators and the high class people were. You can see over there on Capitoline Hill, you can see the prostitutes. You can see the Forum Drain. You can see the prison at the base of Capitoline Hill. You can see the market and some idolatrous temples over there by the Palatine Hill. And so this is kind of how Rome was put together in the ancient world. One final look at the seven hills of Rome. A coin minted in AD 71 in Asia, again, Asia Minor being the place where the seven churches are that originally received the book of Revelation from John, during the reign of Vespasian, depicts Roma as sitting on the seven hills of Rome bearing a sword. So you can see a picture of that coin here. Now this is very interesting because it's not simply seven hills that we are concerned with in Revelation. Remember, there's a woman riding on top of a beast. She's on this beast, and the beast has seven heads, and the seven heads are seven hills. And so, in a sense, the woman in Revelation is on top of the seven hills, right? Well, it wouldn't take very much thought to figure this out for the ancient audience. They use this money on a daily basis, and there's a woman on it, right? She's on seven hills. And so, again, the connection just becomes very obvious. Now, we do have one issue here. The Greek literally says seven mountains. Now, you will oftentimes find that English translations say seven hills. I have been saying 7 hills, but technically, right, the Greek says 7 mountains. And so if Rome is known as the city of 7 hills, not the city of 7 mountains, how can we justify this association with Rome? Well, we need to remember that in the last chapter, Armageddon, the mountain of Megiddo, refers to a location that has no mountain. Megiddo is, it's a 60, 70 foot high hill, right? It's not actually a mountain, but it's part of the apocalyptic imagery. This location that only was a hill got upgraded to being that of a mountain. And so if Revelation takes the hills of Rome and upgrades them to be in mountains, well, this is to be expected. It did this in the very last chapter with a different location. And so I don't think the vocabulary here is a problem in any sense. Now let's focus on the beast. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. Revelation has expanded Exodus's name for God, right? The great I am, into the past, present, future formula of the one who was, who is, and who is coming. So God reveals his name, Yahweh, to Moses back in Exodus chapter 3, and Yahweh is associated with the Hebrew word Hayah, which means to be. Now, I think when you read Exodus 3 in context, the idea is that God always is. That is, he always is faithful to his promises. He always is faithful to his people. That seems to be the context for the name. Nevertheless, Revelation has taken this name of God, that he always is. He is Yahweh. He always is, and expanded it into its natural meaning, that he always was, he always is, he always will be. We discussed this at length way back at the beginning of these videos. Now, imparting to the beast the negative, the one who is not, in the middle part of the formula concerning with the present, is to mock his attempts at divinity. And so the beast is always trying to mimic God, but he ultimately fails to be God, right? And so he also gets this three-part formula: the one who was, who is not, and who will be, right? It gets changed. The middle part is not that he is, but rather that he is not. God is the one who always is. He's the great I am. And so the beast is described as the one who is not, because he is a failed parody of divinity. Now, we discussed the middle part of the formula, the second part that deals with the present, but now let's look at the third part that deals with the future. Altered forms of the third part of the formula, the one who is coming, future, occur in chapters 11 and 16 to predict the character of God's future reign. Thus, the altered third part of the formula for the beast here in chapter 17 is a prediction of his final end. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Back in chapter 11, look at how it works out in relationship to God. We give you thanks, O Lord God, the Almighty, who is and who was, that's present and past. And now the future part, the one who is coming, gets expanded, it gets interpreted, because you have taken your great power and have begun to reign. This happens again in 16. And I heard the angel of the water saying, righteous are you, who is and who was, the present and the past. And now the future part gets interpreted. Oh, Holy One, because you have judged these things. And so God's status as the one who reigns and as the one who judges, that gets superimposed onto the third part of the formula. Well, now we have something similar with the beast. The beast that you saw was and is not. That's past and present, and now the future part, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And so we find the beast is trying to parody God. He's trying to be God. Well, the third part of the formula in relationship to God gets interpreted in places. And so since the beast wants to be God, we will interpret the third part of his formula, only it's not so flattering. It reveals that his destiny is not divinity as he hoped, but destruction. There are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come, And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an eighth, but it belongs to the seven, and it goes to destruction. Now that's kind of a brain twister, I understand. You may look at that and say, what on earth does that mean? And I will tell you the truth, this is one of the most difficult passages in all the Bible. Maybe the most difficult passage in the New Testament. And it's not hard in the sense that it's rocket science and you just can't get your head around it. It's not hard like that. It's hard in the sense that there's so much guesswork and there's so much uncertainty. Even if you come up with an interpretation, every interpretation has blind spots and uncertainties, especially this one. Right? This one is tough. And so what we want to do is we want to look at this sort of clause by clause. Right? Try to understand it just on the level of words and sentences. Make sure we have it straight in our minds. And then we can look at the different interpretations for this passage. And I don't pretend that I can solve this for you. I just want to show you different ideas that have been presented. So we begin with the first part. They are also seven kings. We've seen the seven heads of the beast. They've been interpreted as seven hills, but now they're being interpreted again. They're also seven kings. So we're going to put seven crowns on the screen. Seven crowns to represent these seven kings. All right, so that's simple enough. It says, five of whom have fallen. All right, of our seven kings, five of them are dead by time John writes the book of Revelation. All right, so we're going to put 5 X's over the first 5 crowns to signify the fact that these poor chaps are no longer with us. One is, now that is a reference to the 6th king. Right? The rest of this information has to do with the 7th king. It's all he says about crown number 6. One is. And so what that means is lucky number 6, he's the one who presently reigns when John writes the book of Revelation. There are 7 kings. 5 of them are already dead, and one presently is. That is, one is presently on the throne. The other has not yet come, and when he does come, he must remain only a little while. So the 7th king is in the future when John writes, and he is only going to have a short reign. That's all we're told about him. Number 7 is future. He has a short reign. All right, so simple enough so far. 5 are dead, 1 presently reigns, and the 7th one is future, and his reign will be very short. The beast that was and is not, it is an eighth, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. Right? This is the part where it gets a little tricky, but you take it piece by piece, and it's not so bad. So all of a sudden, we have ourselves an 8th king, right? And he's obviously in the future. It says that he goes to destruction. And why this throws us off is because the beast only has 7 heads that represent 7 kings. How do we suddenly have an 8th king if we only have 7 heads? Well, it tells us he's one of the 7. Right? He's one of the original 7, came back to life again. Now, we've already seen this in Revelation 13, where the beast has 7 heads. One of them is struck and dies, but he comes back to life. So the beast didn't suddenly grow an 8th head here. This is one of the first 7 heads that has just been resuscitated. It's come back to life. All right, so he's got 7 heads. These are 7 kings, and one of the 7 has come back to life again, and he is this 8th king. Right? He gets a worse crown because he's the really bad guy here. Now, it may seem strange to you that we're looking at 7 heads of the beast, and then one of these heads that comes back to life is being discussed as though he is the entire beast. Right? It says the beast that was and is not is the 8th king, which means he's one of these heads. Now, the notion that the entire beast will be associated with one of its heads may seem confusing, but we'll talk about that next week in the next video. Right now, just push that out of your mind. You don't need that to look at what we're looking at. All we need to know is king number 8 is one of the first 7 heads, one of the first 7 kings come back to life again. And he is one of the first 5, right? He's not number 6 or 7. He's one of the first 5. Because what it says about him is that he was and he is not. Well, in the immediate context, we learned that there were 5 kings who were, and a 6th one who is presently reigning. Well, if king number 8 is one of the ones who was, then that means he's one of the first 5. And if he is not, then that means he's not number 6 who is presently reigning. All right, so he's one of the first 5. So this is what we need in our heads in order to begin looking at interpretations of this passage. We need to know that the beast has 7 heads, which represent 7 kings. 5 of them are already dead when John writes. A 6th one is presently reigning. A 7th one will have a short future reign. And then one of the 7 heads comes back to reign again. He is king number 8, and he is one of the first 5 come back from the dead. Now, if you have that in your head, then you can begin to look at other interpretations. So there are a number of ways that people have approached this, and one of the most popular ways, obviously, is then to look at emperors in the first century to try to figure out what John is talking about. Now, everyone doesn't go with this. There are other options here. We will look at some of those other options in next week's video. But for the remainder of this video, we want to look at the Caesars of the first century. Now, this is very difficult, all right, because we know that king number 6 is the one who reigns when John writes the book of Revelation. Problem is, scholars don't agree on when the book of Revelation was written. Now, most of them tend to believe it was Emperor Domitian who was reigning when John wrote the book of Revelation. And there is a strong early church tradition that agrees with this, right? People who came out of Johannine Christianity, out of John's circle, who were only a generation or 2 removed from John, they talk about John writing the book of Revelation in Domitian's time as though it's just fact, as though it's indisputable. And so that is the popular tradition. Most scholars go with that, but certainly all scholars do not go with that. There have been a number of views. And so that makes it very difficult. We don't know where the list starts, and in fact, we don't even know who to include. Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, you can see them. They may not be included. Right? They had contestable reigns. You can look at Galba. He reigns for a short time, 68 to 69. Otho takes the throne and dies in 69. Vitellius takes the throne and dies in 69 before the long reign of Vespasian. So this begs the question, do we include Galba, Otho, and Vitellius in the count, since they had contested rules and because they did not solidify their reign on the empire? Do they count as actual Caesars in the perspective of the book of Revelation, right? Or should they be skipped? See, that makes it all the more difficult. Again, another level of difficulty. It says the first 5 kings have fallen. Does that just mean that the first 5 kings have died? Or does that mean that they had to die a violent death? Because if it means they had to die a violent death, then we need to leave out the Caesars who died a natural death, right? So you can see this can quickly get complex. It could be a real pain, all right? And you can't ever really be sure that you have it right. And so I'm not going to pick a view and say, absolutely, this has to be right. I just want to look at a few of these to give you a sense of how this works, to just give you an idea of what it means to count these kings. And next week, we will look at some other perspectives. So let's look at one particular counting that begins with Julius Caesar. Roman historians themselves debated whether Julius should be included as the first. Suetonius says yes, and Tacitus says no. Some of them will say Julius Caesar is the first true Caesar, and others will say Octavian Augustus is the first true Caesar. So we're just going to go with Suetonius here, and we're going to let Julius Caesar be king number 1. And so this would mean that our first 5 go through Claudius, and then number 6 is Nero. John is writing in Nero's day, and 7 is Galba, and 8 is Otho. Now, this arrangement assumes Galba's inclusion. Right? If he is included, this fits because his reign was short and unstable. Remember that Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, there's a serious question as to whether or not they should be included at all. Well, this list includes them. Right? Let's just imagine that they should be included. Well, all we're told about king number 7 is that he has a short reign. Right? And if you look at it, it fits. Galba's reign is very short, sometime in 68 to sometime in 69. The problem is that Otho did not make war with the Lamb. Remember, number 8 is a really bad dude, right? And Otho's only on the throne for a matter of months. He does not solidify his reign over the empire, much less go and persecute the church. And so this is an example of accounting that probably will not work. So let's move a few things around. Let's leave out Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, since they're the 3 that really didn't solidify their reign. Let's assume that they don't count. Well, now the view still doesn't work. This view collapses if we skip the 3 contestable rulers. Vespasian did not have a short reign. Remember, number 7 has to have a short reign. Vespasian's reign was relatively long. It was 10 years. And Titus was not a persecutor of the church, making Titus, number 8, the really bad guy. This just doesn't make much sense. Also, remember, we looked at this back in Revelation chapter 13, where we learned that Emperor Nero is the one who comes back to persecute the church. Well, that means Nero has to be one of the first 5 kings, because it was one of the first 5 that come back to be bad guy number 8. And if Nero is number 6, well, then he can't be available to come back. You have to be one of the first 5 to come back. And so this is just an example of a list that some people might entertain, but it is not a good list. There's just a lot of problems with this one here, and so we need a different arrangement. Let's just say we're going to begin with Octavian Augustus, instead of Julius Caesar. Immediately, this list has a few things going for it. All right. First of all, Nero is in the first 5. That's where we need him, because he's the bad guy come back. If you didn't see the video on chapter 13, you need to go see that, and you will be convinced of this point. And so we're doing better here already because we have Nero in the 5. Also, it skips the contested rulers. All right. If you include them, this is not going to work, and so you skip them, and you see what happens. It places the time of the book of Revelation is being written during the reign of king number 6, Vespasian. There are good scholars who believe that. I'm not in agreement with them, because I think throughout Revelation we've seen a number of references to Domitian, suggesting that he is on the throne and the audience knows him. This list also fits because number 7 has a short reign. You look at Titus, 79 to 81, that is a relatively short reign. And then it puts Domitian as number 8. Domitian is a good fit for number 8 because he is a persecutor, comparable to Nero, and he required the worship of himself. And so this is a list that certainly has to be considered. Right? Now, again, I'm not in agreement with this because early church tradition, most scholars, and I think a lot of evidence in the book, suggests that Domitian had already reigned or was already on the throne when John wrote the book of Revelation. And there seem to be a number of references to Domitian in the text. For example, Domitian was the first Roman emperor to have 24 lictors around his throne. Well, when you see that God has 24 elders around his throne in Revelation chapter 4, this is to mock Domitian. Domitian thought he was divine, and to glorify himself, he had 24 elders around his throne. Well, God has upstaged him in the book of Revelation by having 24 elders around his throne. Things like that suggest that Domitian has already ascended the throne. Domitian minted a coin where his son, the Son of God, was holding 7 stars. Well, back in Revelation chapter 1, we see Christ holding 7 stars. So there seems to be so many places where Christ upstages Domitian, suggesting that Domitian is already on the throne, the audience already knows him. And so I'm not going to go with this. But let's say we do go with this. It raises a question that any counting will have to deal with. Christ did not return in Domitian's day, in the days of King number 8. So how does this work out? I mean, did Christ simply just fail to come back? Well, most of us are not going to go with that. Most of us are going to come up with a typological or theological explanation. If Domitian is number 8, then every Domitian after him in history who persecutes the church is a version of the 8th king until the second coming. Do we see king number 8 as actually just stretching from the time of Domitian and including all persecuting kings up until the second coming, etc.? I mean, ultimately, you may have to be a little bit creative if you are going to do this business of counting kings, because no matter who you land on as number 8, Christ did not come back in his day. And so a typological, symbolic, theological explanation ultimately ends up having to be employed. This is the final option that I will put on the board, and I think this is the best one if counting kings is the right explanation. Again, there are other perspectives that we will consider, especially the notion that we should be counting empires, world empires, not counting kings. But nevertheless, let's say counting kings is the right answer. This one begins with Claudius, since he's the first emperor of the Christian era. Christians believe that when Jesus came, he brought the kingdom of God on earth. He ascended to the right hand of the Father. He reigns at the right hand of the Father, and his kingdom is spreading on the earth in the form of his church, as he says in Luke 17, that the kingdom of God is already in your midst. And it makes sense to begin with Caligula, because think about it. If we begin with Julius Caesar, or if we begin with Octavian, then Christ comes in the time of Tiberius, and it doesn't interrupt the list of kings at all. It's as though Christ didn't come. And it just seems strange that the arrival of Christ in the days of Tiberius wouldn't be mentioned at all. It wouldn't have any place on the list. It wouldn't divide history in two, the way Christians have already assumed. And that just all seems very awkward. It seems best to start counting after Christ has arrived. The true king comes, he establishes his kingdom, and then we start counting these pseudo-kings, as it were, after Christ has arrived. Now, I think this makes sense, and so if we're going to do this business of counting kings, we should start with Caligula, the first emperor after Christ has arrived. Now, this skips the 3 contestable rulers, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. Right? It puts Nero in the first 5, where he needs to be. It means that Domitian is on the throne when John writes, which fits with early church tradition, and it fits with the majority of scholars. Nerva's rule was short. Again, the 7th king, all we know about him is he had a short reign. We'll look at Nerva. He has a relatively short reign, 96 through 98. And then finally, this makes Trajan bad guy number 8. Trajan's reign was characterized by the violent persecution of the church. And so, I think this is the best counting. All right? If counting kings is the right way to go about this, this is the best counting. And so we haven't talked much about Emperor Trajan because he is still future when John writes. He has not come about yet. And this is a good time to talk about him. So we'll end this study by taking a close look at Emperor Trajan. We have a number of documents from the early church talking about the persecution that they faced under the Roman Empire. Now, what makes the letter of Pliny unique is it's written in the early 2nd century, and it's written from the Roman side of the persecution. Pliny the Younger is a magistrate in Bithynia and Pontus, which is right next door to our churches in Asia Minor here in the book of Revelation. I mean, modern day country of Turkey, that is where our churches are. Well, Bithynia and Pontus is also in the area that we would consider modern day Turkey. So they're right next door. And there is a major persecution being carried out against Christians. And this is the earliest example we have in history of a Roman magistrate saying, I'm dealing with Christians, and this is what I'm doing to them, and these are the issues I'm facing as I deal with Christians. And so Pliny writes this letter to the Emperor Trajan. He says, this is what I'm doing, and I need your advice. And we not only have Pliny's letter to Trajan about persecuting Christians, we have Emperor Trajan's response to Pliny. And so this is a huge, huge document from history that helps us understand this early period of the church. And I usually don't just, look at any document at length, but I want to take time to read at least the gist of this. And it's very fascinating. I think any Christian should read the letter of Pliny and Trajan's response at least one time in his life. So maybe this is that one time for you. All right. So Pliny says, it is my practice, my Lord, to refer to you all matters concerning which I am in doubt. For who can better give guidance to my hesitation or inform my ignorance? So he's flattering the emperor. That's just kind of how these things work. I have never participated in trials of Christians. I therefore do not know what offenses it is, that is, to be a Christian, the practice to punish or investigate, and to what extent. And I have been not a little hesitant as to whether there should be any distinction on account of age, or no difference between the very young and the more mature. So he is looking at this from an administrative standpoint. That do only young Christians get bad punishments, or should old ones get them too? Is it a crime just to be a Christian, or do you have to be a Christian plus commit other crimes as well? This is where he's having issues. And he has never actually been to the trial of a Christian. He has interrogated them, he has executed them, as we found out, but he hasn't actually been to their trials. And so there are blank spots in his knowledge. Whether pardon is to be granted for recanting, that is, for Christians who choose to leave the Christian faith, or if a man who has once been a Christian, if it does him no good to have ceased to be one, whether the name Christian itself, even without offenses, or only if the offenses associated with the name are to be punished. Right? So he has all these issues here. What if a person used to be a Christian, they stop being one? Well, should I still punish him, or should I let him go since he's not a Christian anymore? Meanwhile, in the case of those who were denounced to me as Christians, I have observed the following procedure. I interrogated these as to whether they were Christians. Those who confessed, I interrogated a second and a third time, threatening them with punishment. Those who persisted, I ordered executed. So this is all it takes to be executed as a Christian under this guy, right? You have 3 times to be interrogated, violently interrogated. If you don't deny Christ by the 3rd time, he'll kill you. For I had no doubt that whatever the nature of their creed, stubbornness and inflexible obstinacy surely deserves to be punished. That is, even if they didn't do anything wrong as Christians, just because they're so stubborn, right? Just because they won't quit being a Christian after 3 interrogations, all right? That type of stubbornness in and of itself deserves death. There were others possessed of the same folly, but because they were Roman citizens, I signed an order for them to be transferred to Rome. Right? So if you have citizenship, most people didn't, but if you did have citizenship, they hold your trial in Rome. He doesn't execute you there on the spot. Soon accusations spread, as usually happens, because of the proceedings that were going on, and several incidents occurred. An anonymous document was published containing the names of many persons. So an anonymous person, he's not even going to put his name out there. He puts out there the names of many Christians trying to undermine the church. Those who denied that they were or had been Christians, when they invoked the gods in words dictated by me, offered prayer with incense and wine to your image, which I had ordered to be brought for this purpose together with statues of the gods, and moreover cursed Christ, none of which things those who are really Christians, it is said, can be forced to do. These I thought should be discharged. So, worship the emperor as though he's a god, worship the Roman gods, and publicly curse Christ. If you do this, you know, Pliny will let you off the hook. He'll let you go. Others named by the informer declared that they had been Christians earlier, but had ceased to be so. Some 3 years before, others many years, some as much as 25 years. They all worshipped your image and the statues of the gods and cursed Christ. They asserted, however, that the sum and substance of their fault or error had been that they were accustomed to meet on a certain day before dawn and sing responsively a hymn to Christ as to a God, and to bind themselves by an oath not to commit some crime, but rather not to commit fraud, theft, adultery, falsify their trust, and not to refuse to return a trust when called upon to do so. When this was over, it was their custom to depart and to assemble again to partake of food, but ordinary and innocent food. Now he points out that it's ordinary and innocent food because early Christians were accused of eating the bodies of babies and drinking the blood of babies. And the reason this was is because Christians in the Eucharist and the Lord's Supper always talked about eating the body of Christ and drinking the blood of Christ. Well, in the ancient world, if you didn't want your child, you just left him out in the woods. You just exposed him. You just left him by himself, and he would die, and he was no longer your problem. Well, Christians would go out into the woods and find these neglected babies and raise them up and adopt them and take care of them. And so the pagans said, well, they're always talking about these private dinners they have where they eat flesh and they drink blood. And they're always coming out and taking our abandoned babies, and so they must be eating these babies. Right? It was a weird type of slander, but this was a very popular slander against Christians in the early church. And that's why he's pointing out here that according to these former Christians, all the food was ordinary and innocent, which of course was true. And notice these guys who are no longer Christians themselves admit, we didn't commit any crime. Our oath was to not commit fraud, theft, adultery, etc. And these guys are saying these things, and Pliny regards them as credible witnesses because they're no longer Christians. In accordance with your instructions, I had forbidden political associations, so we need to make sure that Christians are not a politically seditious group. Accordingly, I judged it all the more necessary to find out what the truth was by torturing 2 female slaves who were called deaconesses. Now, this is one of those moments where you have to stop and pause, because many church traditions today do not allow women to be deacons, right? Or don't allow them to be elders of the church or to have any type of leadership role. Well, look at this. This is the early church, early 2nd century. And here you have it from a pagan who is torturing church leadership. And he says, I tortured 2 female slaves who were called deaconesses. Right? So here you have it. There is proof that the early church permitted female deacons, which of course begs the question, if the early church thought it was okay to have female deacons, well, what is wrong with the modern church? All right, so continue. But I discovered nothing else but depraved, excessive superstition. I therefore postponed the investigation and hastened to consult you. So the lives of these female deacons are still hanging on the line. Pliny is waiting for a response from Trajan. For the matter seemed to me to warrant consulting you, especially because of the number involved, for many persons of every age, every rank, and also of both sexes are and will be endangered, for the contagion of this superstition is spread not only to the cities, but also to the villages and farms. Right? In other words, Christian evangelists had been doing their jobs. They had been converting large numbers of people of every race, of both genders, and of every rank of society. Trajan responds, you observe proper procedure, my dear Pliny, in sifting the cases of those who had been denounced to you as Christians. For it is not possible to lay down any general rule to serve as a kind of fixed standard. They are not to be sought out. If they are denounced and proved guilty, they are to be punished. With this reservation, that whoever denies that he is a Christian and really proves it, that is, by worshiping our gods, even though he was under suspicion in the past, shall obtain pardon through repentance, that is, repenting of his Christianity, leaving Christianity. But anonymously posted accusations ought to have no place in any prosecution, for this is both a dangerous kind of precedent out of keeping with the spirit of our age. Now, everybody who has ever lived considered himself to be living in the modern age, because he was. All right, if you are alive, you live in the most modern era that there has ever been. And so Trajan says, yeah, you can continue to interrogate Christians and put them to death. You're doing the right thing. Only don't do it over an anonymous posting. All right, we live in the modern world, and in the modern world and in the modern form of justice, if somebody is going to accuse another person, they can't do it as an anonymous tip. They have to accuse them publicly. Now that is Trajan's uh, one qualm with Pliny's approach. He wants him to not respond to anonymous uh, tips against the church, to make sure he only responds to those who are willing to publicly accuse the church. Do this. Anybody who denies Christ, let them go. Other than that, things can continue as they are. You can continue to interrogate and put to death Christians, including these female deacons who you presently have in your custody. And so, obviously, you have the makings here for a terrible persecution where many Christians would die who had not done anything wrong on a political or criminal level. They just worshipped God through Jesus Christ instead of the gods of Rome and instead of Caesar. And so Trajan reigned from 98 to 117. At the bottom left here, you can see the remains of his temple where he was worshipped in Pergamum. One of our 7 churches in Revelation was at Pergamum. And on the right, you can see, obviously it's badly deteriorated, but part of one of the images that people required to worship. So, if you are going to count kings, you can see that there are a number of difficulties here, right? A number of uncertainties. But that is what it looks like if you're going to approach this passage that way. Next week, in the next video, we will look at this from a different perspective, from the perspective of not counting Roman kings, but counting world empires. And so I hope you will join me for that.